Welcome back. In the last session, we had discussed about the definition of marketing, the concept of value, segmentation, targeting and positioning, and the marketing mix elements. The reason why we discussed all of this was discussed towards the end of the last session, where we discussed about how all of these elements are relevant in the digital marketing space. Now, but at the center of the entire marketing activity that you do is the customer or the consumer. And it is important for us to understand how and what are the different elements that make the consumer so unique. That is where we discuss about consumer behavior, wherein we draw from a lot of psychology, lot of understanding that we have about how consumers behave. There are different things that essentially are influencing the consumer and basically influencing the decision that the consumer makes. And as marketers, the role that we have to follow is to ensure that all of these different influences are somewhere interpreted and somewhere influenced in such a way that the consumer is now interested in purchasing or procuring our products and services rather than those of the competition. So, we will start off from understanding what are the different factors that influence the consumer. The first and most important elements that influence the consumer are environmental conditions. See, for example, there is a certain political environment in the country, there is a certain technological environment in the society, there is a certain societal norms and cultural norms that exist, all of which influence the consumer in certain ways. Culture is one of the major influences of how consumers behave. When I say culture, these are a set of societal norms which are generally acceptable for a vast number of people out there. Say, for example, if you take the Indian culture, there are different food habits, there are different dressing styles, there are different consumption patterns that you will see. There are different festivals that you observe, and there are different consumption patterns in different festivals. All of these are influenced by culture, a culture that most of the people in the country share. There are also some subcultures who have a little deviance from the general culture that you see always. There are different social classes that there are. Say, for example, you have a middle class, you have an upper class, you have a lower class. Each of these customers who identify themselves with one of these social classes will have a certain way of consuming. If you carry a product that is meant for the upper class, it associates yourself with that class of people or with that creed of people or with the people who are generally able to procure and use such products. So, all the environmental factors and all the cultural factors are big influences in how consumers behave in the marketplace. The second important factor are societal factors. In societal factors, one of the most important thing to understand is the role of reference groups. Now, there are a lot of groups that basically are reference groups when consumers make purchase decisions. Many of you are students, you would have a group of friends who influence all the purchase decisions that you make. Your mobile phone choices, your social media consumption choices, your t-shirt and apparel choices, all of which are influenced by a set of friends that you have. Because now you want to associate yourself as being part of this group, you will consume things which are also consumed by these people. So, that is what we generally call as a reference group, and a reference group is very important because a reference group often is the direction in which you will consume. There are also aspirational groups. Many times you know that your immediate friend group or your immediate family does not necessarily have a certain consumption pattern, but you might find that the Indian cricket team is endorsing a certain product, a product that you want to consume because you aspire in with the kind of people who are consuming these products. You look into Bollywood actors and actresses and they endorse a certain set of products, and because you aspire to be part of that group, you will consume these products. So, aspirational groups as opposed to reference groups are also important influences in consumer decision making. There are also people out there who are experts in certain areas. Say, for example, in your friend group there might be a person who has the expertise and who has a greater understanding about digital cameras as compared to all the other friends that you have. So, this person becomes somebody who we call in marketing literature as an opinion leader. Every time you have a certain doubt or every time you have a certain requirement of consumption of a certain product category, you will reach out to this person. You will ask this person as to what are the products out there and what are the parameters based on which you should make your consumption decision. So, opinion leaders, reference groups and aspirational groups, all of them influence consumer decisions and consumer buying patterns in the marketplace. There are of course a lot of other personal factors like the age of the consumer, the income of the consumer, the place that the consumer lives in, the life cycle stage of the consumer. All of these patterns and all of these features also influence the consumer's decision making in the marketplace. Now that we have understood what are the key factors that influence the consumer, which being the societal factors, the cultural factors, your family, your friends, etc., and a lot of personal factors, we need to now look into details of how the consumer thinks and how the consumer makes certain decisions that he or she makes. We will talk about two different models that help us understand how the customer goes through in making a purchase decision. Now, you might feel that it is a very simple thing. Every time that the customer has to buy a mobile phone, or every time the customer has to buy a television, or sometime that they have to buy an air conditioner, it is a very easy thing for consumers to make that choice, and it is something that automatically happens in the consumer's mind. But no, in psychology, in marketing and in consumer behavior, we try to break this entire process down into different stages. Now, we will talk about a 5-stage process that consumers generally use to make a purchase decision. Now, these 5 stages that you can see are need recognition, search for information, evaluation of alternatives, product purchase and post purchase behavior. Now, I will come into each of them in detail and we will discuss how the customer moves from one stage to the other and how he comes to the purchase decision. And why is it so relevant to us? Because we try to make sure that the customer can seamlessly move from one stage to the other, and at the end of the day, the customer can come and procure our products. Now, the first and most important stage here is need recognition or identification of a certain need. Now, in the last session we had discussed that a need is basically a basic human requirement that the customer has. Say for example, hunger, thirst, air, etc. are basic needs. Now, the customer needs to understand that there is certain need that exists. Now, in many cases the customer feels and understands these needs on their own. Say for example, you have your mobile phone breaks one fine day, you have a need for a new mobile phone because you want to communicate with others. You have an understanding that your mobile phone does not work as well as it was expected to work because it has become very old. So, now you have a need for replacing this and getting a new mobile phone. So, in many cases the customer will identify the need in himself or herself. In many other cases the customer does not necessarily know the need. So, hence there are ways in which we provide stimuli and we help the customer understand these needs. Now, once the customer has understood that there is a specific need, the next thing the customer does is to search for information, search for ways in which he can fulfill that need. And this search for information is one of the critical ways wherein we try to make ourselves relevant to the customer. The search for information in most cases starts from your immediate reference group like we discussed earlier. You will go about, ask your friends, you will see what kind of products your friends are consuming, you will see a lot of advertisements out there, and in today's day, because information is so easily accessible, almost 2/3 of consumers who are making a purchase decision start from the internet. They go to a search engine like Google or Yahoo or Bing or any of these places, they start searching for information there. You see which products exist, you see which companies are offering these products, you see what are the price of these products, what are the different features that are available, you have options to compare all of these products. That is where we talk about the second stage, which is search for information. Once the customer has searched for a lot of information, the third stage basically is to evaluate the available alternatives. Say consider the example that the customer is now buying a mobile phone, or let's take the example of any of you. Is buying a mobile phone a very easy decision? Now, the answer to this question in many cases is no, because the number of options that you have, the number of brands that are available, the closeness of all of these brands, all the brands look the same, the specifications are the same. It is very difficult for you to identify which of these brands to buy. So, it becomes very difficult for customers to now evaluate the available alternatives. Many a times the customer looks for key features in each of these products. The customer looks for features which are relevant to the customer. Some customers might find that the battery life of the product is the most important feature for me. So, I will go for the product that has the highest battery life. Some other customers feel that the style of the product is more important to me. So I'll go for the product that has the best style. Some other customers think that I am a brand conscious person, so I should buy a product that is the best known brand. So customers will go for the product that is the best known brand. So irrespective of whichever customer you are, the customer identifies a set of parameters, a set of attributes in the product, and based on these attributes the customer starts evaluating all of these different products. So you started with identification of need, you went into searching for information, you went into evaluating of all the alternatives that are available. Once you have evaluated all the alternatives, think back at the case of you buying a mobile phone. It's not a very easy decision to make, but once you have arrived at a product to buy, this particular brand, this particular model, this particular price point that I have to buy, now you get into the fourth stage, which is the actual purchase decision or actual purchasing of the product. There are different options that you have. You can think about buying the product from the online space. You can go to one of the e-commerce portals and buy the product there. You can think about buying the product from the offline space, wherein you can go to the electronic store nearby to your house and buy the product from there. There are different reasons why you will choose one over the other. We know that in general, if you consider online versus offline shopping scenarios, online shopping scenarios you will have products which are a little cheaper. There are different reasons why online companies are able to provide you products at a cheaper rate. We will come to all of these things in detail when we come to these sessions. But you will find that there are price advantages you have when you buy it from the online space, but it takes time for the product to be delivered to you. If you are looking for a product immediately, you want the possession of the product immediately, then you cannot wait for the product to be delivered to your house probably 3 days, 4 days or a week later. So hence you might go to a retail store nearby and buy the product from the retail store nearby, wherein you will be able to get the product immediately, but it will of course be at a higher price. Now that is a trade-off that the customer generally makes. So purchasing is the fourth stage of the purchase process or the decision making journey of the customer. And the next important element here is about the post-purchase behavior. After you have purchased the product, there are certain behaviors that the customer generally shows. One of them is the evaluation of whether the product was worthy or not. You would have all heard about this concept of satisfaction. Now satisfaction essentially is the difference between how the product or service performed versus how you expected it to perform. Say for example, you identified that you wanted a new product, you searched for all the information that was available, you evaluated different mobile phone options out there. The most important parameter for you was battery life. You expected that brand A is going to give you a battery life of 3 days. You buy this product, bring it back home. Remember, your expectation was that the battery life is going to be 3 days. Once you have come home, you start using this product and in 8 hours the battery has gone dead. Remember, you started off with a full charge, but the battery died in 8 hours. Now the performance of the product was 8 hours, whereas your expectation was 3 days. Now the performance was not able to meet your expectations, the outcome is going to be dissatisfaction. When the performance of the product is exceeding the expectation, say for example, you expected the product to be working for 3 days, but the product actually worked for a whole week. Now your performance is actually exceeding the expectations, and that is where we say that the customer is extremely satisfied. Now what happens when you are satisfied? You generally have a good feeling about the product. You have a reason why you will go about talking good about the product. You will also write a lot of good reviews on e-commerce platforms and on social media. If you are unhappy about the product, you will do all the things on the contrary. You will go about talking bad things about the product. You will tell your friends and family members never to buy the product. So how the customer behaves towards the end of the purchase process and after the purchase of the product is extremely important, because many times this is where genuine feedback is collected from the customer. Whether the customer liked the product, if the customer liked the product, then he is going to share a lot of positive word of mouth. If the customer didn't like the product, there is going to be a lot of negative word of mouth that will happen. If the customer extremely liked the product, there is going to be a concept where the customer will come back and buy the same product. This is what we call loyalty. If the customer doesn't like your brand, then the customer is never going to come back and buy the product from you. So this is where we say that you have lost a customer. So these are the 5 stages, and each of these 5 stages are critical, because every customer, or let's say in most cases, the customer goes from all of these stages one after the other. These stages once again are need recognition, information search, evaluation of alternatives, purchase and post-purchase decision making. Another model that helps us understand the journey the customer takes, similar to the one that we discussed recently, is something that we call the AIDA model. Now, the AIDA model is also a 5-stage model which starts off with awareness, interest, desire, action and advocacy. Now, each of these stages are similar to what we discussed earlier. Now, what do I mean by awareness? This is where the customer is aware of the certain products that are out there. For example, when we talk about how the customer buys a certain product, today if you are thinking about buying a certain mobile phone, you need to be aware of the different brands that are out there, you need to be aware of different products that are out there. So, that is where the first stage of awareness talks about. So, the first and most important activity that marketers need to do is to make sure that you are somebody who the customer is aware of. The customer knows that your brand exists. Say for example, when we talk about different products out there, if you take the entire number of products that are available in the mobile phone category and put everything down into one bucket, all the brands of products, all the brands of mobile phone manufacturers and put them into one bucket, you can call them the total set of every brand or every offering that is available in this particular category. Now, from the total set, of course, the customer is not going to be aware of all brands that are out there. The customer might be aware of a few brands which are out there. So, from the total set, there are a smaller number or a limited number of brands that the customer is aware of. Now, I might be aware of 3 brands, 5 brands, 7 brands in a certain category. Think of all the brands that you are aware of in the mobile phone category. Each customer has a certain number of brands that the customer is aware of. This is what we call as the awareness set. Now, one of the most important activities that marketers try to do or advertisers try to do is to make sure that your brand is in the awareness set of all the customers in your target group. All customers which are part of the target segment that we discussed in the previous session should be aware of your brand. So, that is where awareness set comes into picture. Once a customer is aware of a certain brand, once there is also a need for buying a new mobile phone, the customer starts looking into the awareness sets and starts considering not all but a few of these brands that are out there. Say for example, I as a customer am aware of 10 different brands of mobile phones, but I might not necessarily be considering all these 10 brands when I am making a purchase. For example, there might be brands which I know, but these brands are not suitable for my requirement. So, I might necessarily not think about these brands when I am thinking about purchase. So, that is where you talk about a smaller set of brands out there, even smaller than the awareness set, which generally we call the consideration set. Now, the consideration set are all the brands which the customer is evaluating. Remember the 5-stage model that we discussed earlier in this session? So, need recognition, search for information, evaluation of alternatives. In evaluation of alternatives, the brands that you evaluate are the ones that are there in the consideration set. Now, even from the consideration set, the customer now thinks about reducing the options and arriving at the final choice. So, that is where the customer thinks about a choice set. The choice set is generally 1 or 2 or at max 3 brands which the customer is now thinking to purchase. So, you start from the total set, you went into the awareness set, you came into the consideration set, you went into the choice set, and from the choice set the customer finally makes a purchase decision. Now, what the AIDA model tells us is, it tells us how you can create yourself, how you can build yourself into this model. Say for example, the first of this stage is where you create awareness for your product. You might be communicating that the offering that you have certain benefits. You might be talking about the points of differentiation of this product. You might be talking about other advantages, the unique selling proposition of this product. By doing so, you are now telling the customer that, hey, look, see, I am having this offering for you and you should be aware of this offering. Once the customer is aware of this offering, the next stage in the model is basically interest. Once the customer is available, once the customer is aware, the customer might start showing interest in the product. Now, when the customer starts showing interest in the product, this is where the customer seeks out a lot of information. This might be the case where the customer goes into a search engine and starts looking for your product. This might be the case where the customer talks about your product and tries to gather information. So, once awareness and interest is done, third stage is where the customer has a lot of information about your product to now start desiring to buy your product. This is where the customer is actually given much more information, a lot of incentives, a lot of motivating factors to now come and purchase your product. So that is the desire stage. Once attention, interest and desire is created, the fourth stage is where the customer actually acts. Action is where the customer actually purchases the product. So like we discussed in the earlier model, action is where the customer is buying your product, and the next stage is advocacy. Once the customer uses the product, like we discussed earlier, he can be satisfied, he can be dissatisfied. In each of these cases or either of these cases, the customer is now going to talk about your product. He might talk good in case he liked the product, he might talk bad in case he didn't like the product. So in either of these cases, the customer will now talk about your product. So that is the next stage. So awareness, interest, desire, action and advocacy are the 5 stages in the second consumer behavior model that we discussed. So in sum, both of these models are a lot similar to each other, but in the course of this modules that we cover on digital marketing, we might come into either of these models. So it is important for you to understand both these models and why these two models are important, because it helps us map the entire journey that the customer goes through in arriving at a product purchase decision, and beyond the product purchase decision, the customer might also engage in post purchase behavior. Now that we have discussed both the 5-stage customer decision making process and the AIDA model, next we are going to discuss about a few other elements which are generally heard of, but we need to have a deeper understanding of those as well. First of these elements is what we call as motivation. What is motivation? Motivation is when the customer has a very strong drive to purchase a certain product and fulfill the need associated with it. Now, we discussed what needs are. Needs are basic human necessities. Needs could be biogenic needs or psychogenic needs. Biogenic needs are those that are required for your survival. Psychogenic needs are things that are required for you to feel complete, feel happy. So there are different motives that drive customers to make purchase decisions in the marketplace. Say for example, the need for hunger. Once the need for hunger or need for food gets beyond a certain point, you will be extremely motivated to purchase a food item or go to a restaurant or have a burger. When you have an extreme need to associate with a certain reference group or with a certain aspirational group, you will consume a product which associates with that aspirational group. So motivations are generally when the need or the drive is so high that the customer has to act immediately. The second important thing that you would have commonly heard is what is perception. Now perception is where customers collect a lot of information, organize this information and try to paint a picture of what the world is according to them. Now everybody has a certain perception of how the world is. Now even products and services that we offer become part of this perception of the customer. Remember when we discussed about positioning, there are points of differentiation and points of parity wherein we are trying to create an image of what our product or service is in the customer's mind. We are essentially trying to create a perception in the customer's mind. This perception is very important because many times it is this perception that drives the customer to either choose your product or to choose your competitor's product. Now this perception is created by the kind of information that you provide to customers, the kind of offerings that you provide to customers, the kind of things the customer hears about your product or services from other people that they are associated with. Now not all information that you provide to the customer is always understood by the customer. The customer has a very selective span of attention. The customer only pays attention to things that the customer is interested in. Say for example, you might not always pay attention to an advertisement about say for example a nutritional health drink, but if you are on a diet, you will start paying attention to a healthy nutritional drink advertisement. This is what we call selective attention. Now selective attention is critical because you have to understand that not everybody is going to be attentive about what you provide. The next case is selective distortion. Not everything that you provide to the customer or not all information that you provide to the customer is always accepted and memorized in a way that you provide to the customer. The customer has a method by which the customer now starts distorting facts that you provide with only understanding things in the way that the customer wants to understand. So in many cases you will have to be very clear to the customer and tell the customer very clearly, because otherwise the customer has a way of being biased in certain directions whereby they might want to distort information that you provide. The third element is that the fact that the customer does not always remember everything that you show the customer. The customer has selective retention. The customer is only going to retain information that you provide to the customer about things that the customer is so interested in. You might remember advertisements which are extremely interesting, extremely new, extremely exciting, something that is novel, something that you have not seen. Other advertisements which are generic out there, advertisements which are very commonly seen, you might not remember. Now, there are some elements of content that make it interesting enough to be retained in your memory. So, this is what we generally say selective retention. So, selective attention, selective distortion and selective retention, all three are extremely important in how the customer learns and how customer retains things in their memory. Because every experience that the customer has in the marketplace helps the customer learn a few things. If you consume a product and the product ends up being not so great, you will realize and you will learn that this product is not so great. That will stop you from considering this product in your subsequent purchase decisions. If you go to a certain place in the market and buy a product, the product ends up being counterfeit. You realize that such marketplaces or such places in the market where you get products are not good, are risky in certain ways. And all of this learning that you have is somewhere encoded into your memory. So, every time the customer now has to make a purchase decision, there is certain retrieval of this information from the memory which helps the customer in making decisions. So, motivations and perceptions are extremely critical, and perceptions is what as marketers we try to create in the marketplace. Now, one another important thing that we need to understand in the digital space is the importance of this concept called word of mouth. You would have heard this concept very frequently. Word of mouth is all informal customer to customer interaction that is not controlled by the marketer. Now, the definition of word of mouth is right here. You can see and read the definition for yourself, but it is very important for you to understand the importance of word of mouth. Word of mouth is generally compared with advertising and other sources of marketer controlled ways of reaching out to customers. Word of mouth is essentially all informal communication that you get to hear from your friends, from your family members, from other people who do not have necessarily a reason to talk to you about a product in a good way or in a bad way. Word of mouth is all the product reviews that you see on social media. It is all the product reviews that you see on e-commerce platforms, on Amazon.com, on Flipkart, on Paytm, on any of these e-commerce platforms. You will see that there are product reviews available. Now, most of these product reviews out there, of course, I am not saying all product reviews, but most of these product reviews are uninfluenced organic inputs given by customers who have either used the product or seen somebody else using the product. Now, it is much more relevant and much more credible than advertising that is out there, because when generally a customer sees an advertisement, the customer has a feeling that this advertisement is out there to influence me to go and purchase the product that is being advertised. A word of mouth, on the other hand, does not necessarily have such a motive. Word of mouth is generated by customers who have used a certain product and have found that product to be useful and have told me that this product is extremely great and extremely useful. So, I attach greater credibility to word of mouth. I attach more importance to word of mouth as compared to the other forms of communication or information available to me. I generally have a tendency to go to e-commerce platforms and look into word of mouth before making a purchase decision. So, all of this information that is out there in the digital space, specifically information that has become known as word of mouth, is extremely critical in how the customer goes about making the purchase decision. And this is one essential thing that has changed the way in which consumers make purchase decisions. Earlier too, there was a lot of word of mouth out there. Customers attached greater importance to word of mouth, but with the emergence of digital technology, word of mouth has now taken center stage. For example, earlier, say 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted to buy a car, you would have spoken to a few friends, you would have spoken to one person who is either an expert in automobiles, who works in an automobile company or is a mechanic nearby to understand which is the best car out there. You would have heard from these people, all the information that you heard from these people would have come to you immediately, you would have forgotten it in some time, your family members, your friends, other people would have heard from you, they would not have necessarily got this information directly. So, the reach of word of mouth was very limited, word of mouth was very spontaneous. There was no way by which you could remember all of these exact details about the vehicle and talk to somebody else. But with the emergence of the digital space, word of mouth has unlimited reach right now. You write something on Facebook, probably 3,000 of your friends hear about it. You tweet about this, a few million people hear about it. You put it up on Amazon.com or Flipkart or any of these e-commerce platforms, every single customer who comes to that platform is now viewing the certain content that you have provided. So the reach of word of mouth has become exponentially high. Word of mouth is extremely fast propagating. You would have seen a lot of viral campaigns recently. You would have seen a lot of campaigns which basically have been started by consumers and which basically are spread like wildfire. You talk bad about a product. You remember there was a product, a noodle product in India recently, a few years back, which basically pulled off the shelves because of a controversy. Such negative word of mouth is spread much faster. So although word of mouth has always been there, it is with the emergence of the digital space that word of mouth has now taken center stage. And word of mouth will be a central construct that we will discuss throughout our journey in this course. Apart from this word of mouth, the entire marketing context has also changed drastically with the emergence of the digital space. Now, in the next sessions, we will talk in detail about how digital has evolved and how consumers have changed, what are the different tools, techniques, platforms and other elements of the digital marketing toolkit that you necessarily can use. But as a precursor to the next sessions, we will see how digital space has completely altered and completely changed the way marketing operates. Say for example, the reach has exponentially increased with the emergence of digital marketplace. Earlier you had a limitation with respect to how many customers you could reach. You had a limitation with respect to how many customers could come to your retail store. You had a limitation to how many customers are viewing television or reading a magazine or reading a newspaper. Today you basically have let go of all of these limitations. You can basically reach out to any customer anywhere in the world who has access to an internet and access to a platform or a device that can access the internet. So the reach has become exponentially great. The second thing is you are today able to reach customers throughout the day, any time of the day. Earlier customers had to wait for office timings, had to wait for the time that the shop was open, and only on these times you were able to get to the customer or the customer was able to reach out to you. Today you basically have a 24/7 operation. The customer can come to an e-commerce platform at any point of the day, any time of the week and purchase the products that they are looking for. You do not need to necessarily have the kind of people who are staffing the e-commerce platform, because most of these things are automated today. Earlier it was very difficult for us to gather information. If you had to have some information about what customers thought, what customers behaved or what things customers were thinking, it was very difficult for you because you always had to have those long surveys that you had to take to the customer and gather a lot of information from the customer as part of your marketing research activity. But today all of this is become much more easier because everything that the customer does on a digital space is now trackable. You have access to a lot of data. The customer browses from website A to website B, you are able to see what the customer has been doing. The customer comes to your e-commerce platform and looks for a certain product, you know that this is the customer who was looking for this particular product. You know that the customer is also going through these other websites. You know that the customer has a social media account where the customer is connected to 10 other people, a few of whom could be influencers whom you can use to reach out to this customer and motivate this customer to buy. You also have options wherein new business models have come out. The entire e-commerce industry has come out wherein you are able to sell a lot of products which traditionally you are not able to sell, because a traditional retail space has limited shelf space. You couldn't sell a lot of products there. Today with e-commerce you are able to sell much more products through this channel. So the entire way in which we do marketing, the whole of the creation, communication, delivery and exchange of value has completely transformed with the new technology and with the emergence of internet. So these and many other things will be discussed in the coming sessions. In the next session, we will specifically look into the origins of digital marketing, the scope of digital marketing, the kind of landscape that we operate in. You would have heard a few of these terms. We will talk about outbound marketing, we will talk about inbound marketing, we will talk about social media marketing, we will talk about mobile platforms, we will talk about different types of media that you can use. We will talk about paid media, earned media, owned media and different elements of digital marketing as an introduction to the different domains that we are going to discuss throughout this course. So I would once again urge you to go back into the readings that have been mentioned, do a few of these exercises so that you are all prepared to come and carry on with the other sessions that we have in offer. Thank you very much.